A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So, what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweetfish Media. Guys, I've got with me today James Winter, who is VP of Marketing at Brandfolder. James, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Super happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm happy you're here too. We're going to be talking about something that I'm personally very interested in and that I don't think we've actually laid out on the show here before. We're going to be telling folks what it takes to be on the path to be in marketing leadership. I do talk to a lot of folks who are in that role, but we don't often dig into what kind of background and skills it takes to get there. But before we dig into all of that, James, I'd love it if you would just give us all a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the folks at Brandfolder have been up to these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined Brandfolder about a year ago, and it's a super exciting company. We're in the digital asset management space, and Brandfolder makes it super easy for brands of all shapes and sizes to find, manage, distribute, and analyze all of their digital assets, everything from photos, videos, 3D files, logos, etc. And it's a super exciting company for me because it poses the very interesting challenge of having a very broad target market. We have customers in so many different segments that it's really hard to narrow down. So you've got to be able to context switch between selling to head of creative operations at a company like Eventbrite to talking to someone in the Midwest who works in a very old school manufacturing industry. So that's been a super fun challenge that I've taken on since joining the company.
It sounds like a super fun challenge. And I can't wait to sort of hear more about the super fun challenges that you've experienced and that folks can anticipate on this journey into leadership as a marketer. I think that there is a lot of talk and a lot of conversation to individual contributors on, I'd say, the sales side of the house as far as how to get there. Nearly every sales leader that I follow or thought leader that I follow on LinkedIn, for instance, talking about, hey, sales reps, here's what you got to do to get there. Sit your leadership down and tell them that you want the job, basically, is the tone that takes. But even the more prominent marketers that I follow aren't often talking about how they got there. And so let's dig in. You've got 5 points that you and I talked about offline that kind of give folks some insight. So let's start with your particular journey and what you think was maybe the number one factor as far as how you got there, and then we'll sort of work backwards into these other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one interesting point that I just want to make is probably one of the reasons you don't hear a lot of marketers talking about this is there isn't really a set path. I think it's very different for everyone. Mm-hmm. And while there is some things that might give you a higher probability of getting to that leadership position in a given amount of time, I think marketing can be a very winding journey. But enough of that. My journey has actually been fairly straightforward to completely contradict everything that I just said. I started out with a internship in college at Seagate doing product marketing for hard drives, and I knew nothing about hard drives or product marketing, so that was a pretty fun experience. And from there, I did a little stint in product management, discovered it wasn't for me. I like being a little bit closer to the customer than product orgs often are, especially in very engineering heavy organizations.
Sure.
And then I did a couple stints as a product marketing manager, the first product marketing manager at some startups. The first one was Nexmo, which was a pretty high growth company that went from about 30 employees to 200 and went from I think 30 million to 300 million a year in ARR. And I was there managing all the product marketing for that main product, which was a super fun experience and had a lot of impact on my career growth in general. And from there, took a product marketing gig at Dialpad, which was probably the most formative experience in my career because I got to work under a really great leader in Morgan Norman, as well as a ton of just really awesome marketers. He built such an amazing team. My boss, John Finch, who was running product marketing, Kieran Mahoney, who was running demand gen. There's so many brilliant people that I got to work with on that team that it really had a huge impact on my desire to lead and also to put me in a position where that would be possible. And then from there, I was interviewing for a couple other individual contributor product marketing manager roles, primarily with Salesforce and Uber at the time, and a very tiny startup that was about 20 people. The CEO reached out on LinkedIn and asked me to come interview. And I went through the process and thought, I wasn't really ready for it yet. And he sat me down and he's like, you know what, those roles are going to be at Salesforce and Uber 10 years from now. You don't always get a chance like this. And it really resonated with me. And I had the opportunity to work under some really bad marketing leaders and then a really great marketing leader. And seeing both extremes gave me the confidence to say, I can probably do better than the worst I've seen. And I've learned a lot from the best. So let's give this a shot.
I love that. I have questions on specifically what makes a person earn the title of a really bad marketing leader, but we'll come back to that. I noticed when you talked about your background, a lot of product in there, right? And that's you said that's typical. We talked about one of the first things to understand about this path is that 70% of the folks in marketing leadership have product backgrounds. So talk about why you think that is.
Yeah, so product marketing is a pretty tough role to define. But I think it shares a few things in common with being the head of marketing because some of the things that you're most responsible for, like the messaging and positioning of the product, understanding customers' needs, being cross-functional, storytelling, those are all things that are so important when you're leading a marketing team. And not to say that other roles like demand gen or content might not be just as important, but I think product marketing gives you a little bit more of a taste of what marketing leadership would be like potentially than some other roles because it touches so many different parts of the company. You're talking to the sales org a lot. You might be working with the customer success org. You have a lot of visibility with leadership. You're responsible for this very important all-encompassing task of how everyone is going to be talking about your product and your customers. And so I think that's what really leads to it. And yeah, it's fascinating. Clearbit, I think, with a friend of mine, put together a piece of content and they looked at 300 marketing leadership roles and 70 or 80% of them started in product marketing or had product marketing experience.
I think that's really good to know and understand, especially if you're beginning this journey and not knowing, even if some folks, let's say you were coming from sales and wanting to get into marketing and not knowing where to go and saying, what's the sort of entry point to let folks know, hey, product might be what that entry point should be for you, I think is a really valuable piece of advice. And then from there we talked offline about some regrets you had coming up with respect to this next sort of thing that folks should focus on. And that's what they absorb from others. I think it stands to reason if the reason why these backgrounds of most of these folks are in product is because it touches so many of the other orgs, then that idea that you're learning from all these other orgs as you come up and that being part of calculating that into being part of your path is really impactful. But talk about some regrets you have with respect to that.
Yeah, and just to clarify, because I think some people might be slightly confused, I'm referring to product marketing, and product management is separate. So I just want to make that distinction in case some people are a little bit confused by that. But when I think back to Dialpad, I did have a really great opportunity to learn from a lot of different people, and I did take some of that stuff away. I got to understand how important attribution is and marketing ops are. Mm-hmm. But while I saw a little bit of it at a high level, I totally fell into the trap, and I think a lot of people do this, where they're so focused on their day-to-day job that they don't take the time to really understand, if you're in demand gen, what can I learn about product marketing from the person I sit next to every day? And my biggest regret was not taking more time to really sit down with my marketing ops person or my demand gen person to understand what they did and how their job worked and what type of really useful information I could take away from that. So I think the advice I would give there is, if you happen to be lucky enough to work at an organization that has a lot of really, really intelligent individual contributors in different facets of marketing, reach out to them, ask them, hey, teach me about this concept. Like, what is multi-touch attribution? What is visible? Why is this important? Or how do you come up with a content strategy? Whatever it is, because one of the things that had a massive impact on my career was working under Morgan. He, better than almost anyone else I've ever worked for, had the ability to be dangerous in a conversation with anyone on the marketing team, whether that was the SDR organization, the demand gen function, the marketing ops function, events. He had such a broad base of knowledge, and this is something I'll talk about later, but contrasting that with previous leadership who had very, very deep knowledge in one particular area, but didn't necessarily know how to talk or give advice or anything to other facets of it or disciplines. That was one of the things that I wish I had done a better job of when I had the opportunity to.
I think that's a great idea, marketing or not. I am seeing a lot of folks giving that same kind of advice to folks with sales backgrounds and various other backgrounds as well. It's something that I kind of accidentally did well coming up. I didn't know that it was a strategy. I was just being curious. But it's sort of the internal version of this next piece of the puzzle here, which is network like crazy. So you're talking about within your organization and really within your team, maybe learning as much as you can and taking away. But networking like crazy takes that to the next level. Go ahead and dig into that for us.
Yeah, I think the thing that I probably do better than other things that I do, weird way of saying this, but I think something I've been very fortunate in is really taking advantage of the time that I lived in San Francisco to develop relationships both personally and professionally with a lot of amazing people. And it's amazing because, yeah, you can learn a lot from people within your organization, but marketing moves at such a quick rate that anything you read online is probably not as effective by the time it gets published. So you really have to be on the cutting edge. And there's no textbook or blog or singular piece of content you can read to learn about what you should be doing. And so I really take advantage of the fact that I'm friends with such smart, amazing people who can give me advice on pretty much anything. Like, my friend Hudson Arnold, who works at Dropbox now on the growth team, he kind of wrote the internal optimization playbook for Optimizely. So if I ever have a question about testing or optimization, I can go to him. Or, my friend Kieran, who speaks on panels about ABM, and he's really smart about that. If I ever have a question about that, I can go to him. And so just developing those relationships. And I think a lot of people talk about networking in the single-minded way of like helping you get further along in your career, which I think it is very valuable for as well. But there's so much you can learn from other people, and oftentimes they're very happy to share and talk about it to you. So take advantage of that as much as possible.
For real. Straight up sound advice. You know, I'm feeling it when I throw away all pretext and pretense and just start throwing slang at you. Like, straight up, dog. That's what you got to do. Google can only take you so far, homie. Nah, but there's no two ways about it. When you talk with the real one, this is the type of thing that comes out. And so we're going to come back to this point of folks you learn from because they had a sort of a broader sense of knowledge and interaction with other disciplines. And you were talking about it offline with respect to this T-shaped model that folks are using a lot of the time when it comes to how they map out their career, how they prepare themselves for what's next. Talk about that a little bit and why you think maybe folks should, chill on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of my more controversial opinions, although I have plenty of them. My friend here at work likes to say that I've got plenty of hot takes. But this one, and just for folks that aren't familiar, a T-shaped marketer refers to someone that has broad knowledge covering a wide range of things, but goes really in depth in one or two areas. And I think generally that is good advice. I think you do need to have at least one sort of specialty, especially if you're at a very early stage startup. You may or may not, even as the leader, be the most knowledgeable person in that area. But I think you hit the point of diminishing returns, and this is just my own personal opinion. I think you hit the point of diminishing returns on that way quicker than most people probably realize. You can kind of think of it like, are you going to really learn that much more by spending 10 years as a demand gen director or marketer in terms of something that would actually help you as a leader compared to if you spent 5 years doing that and then spent the other 5 years learning other disciplines? And I'm sure not everyone agrees with this, and I'm sure there's a good argument against it. But for me, when I looked at my career path and I was making the decision between staying in product marketing, doing it at a really great organization and learning from other product marketers, which definitely had a lot of value. But when I compared that to how much I could learn about building a marketing team and organization and system from the ground up, brand new to the company for the first time ever, I saw a greater opportunity to learn by going down that route. And that's something I've always valued super highly in my career. So I think, get your specialty, get good at it, learn it, but don't be afraid to jump into something else, even if you don't feel like you've learned everything there possibly is to know. In all likelihood, if you understand 80% of the role that you've been doing, you've probably maxed out the main point of value that you would get from staying in it.
For sure. And at that point of diminishing return, that's the point at which we get to this next idea, which is you at a certain point just got to start like betting on yourself and jumping in. And, maybe you'll learn some things that you didn't know on the fly, but you would have even learned what you didn't know if you just stayed where you were safe. So that's the fifth sort of facet of this career path as you've laid it out for us, is to take the leap. Talk about what that looked like for you.
Yeah. One thing that I consider myself pretty fortunate in is I've never really been too afraid of putting myself in new situations. I grew up internationally as a kid. I moved around a little bit. And I think that taught me at a young age that oftentimes whatever you're worried about as far as like taking a jump into something new, it's almost always worse than it actually ends up being. And I think people are highly adaptable, and there's so much opportunity in taking that amount of risk that you can and whatever you feel comfortable with, pushing it a little bit and putting yourself in a new situation, because that's the best way to learn. And I think that's one of the things that's so great about living in San Francisco, where all of this tech is, because everything moves so fast and you learn so much by jumping from one company to another, because every company does things slightly differently, and you get the opportunity to learn from so many more people and how so many more people do things than you would if you stayed at one place. And I remember having this sort of heated discussion with one of the investors at the first startup I worked at, because he was trying to convince me not to leave. And I respect his opinion greatly, and I love the guy. But his argument was I would learn more by staying at Nexmo and watching it sort of get acquired and do all these things that ended up going on to happen. But it never really seemed to sink in with me. And I believe that there's so much more to learn out there. And San Francisco was such a great place to do it that I would be remiss not to take that opportunity. And so I've never been afraid to job hop. I don't at all mind putting myself in new situations. I think that's super exciting. And so when my previous CEO, Eric, reached out to recruit me to join Aspire IQ, I was definitely trepidatious, and there was a lot of doubt and questions in my mind, but I was fortunate enough to be able to take that risk. I didn't have a family. My career was established enough that I wouldn't have had a ton of difficulty finding another job if I needed one. And so just saying, screw it, jump off the ledge, put yourself in that new position. I think most people, and I had this conversation with a friend of mine recently where she asked, how did you know when you were ready? And it kind of goes back to some of the poor leaders I've worked for in the past. But I think most people are probably more ready than they think they are. And it's easy to fall victim to the imposter syndrome idea of like needing to check off X boxes to get to the point where you feel ready for this. But I think it's probably earlier than you think it is.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen this, and I spent some time in Austin, in the startup streets of Austin, Texas, which aren't too dissimilar from what you describe in San Francisco, in terms of there being this opportunity to experience how things work up close at a bunch of different companies, right? Mm-hmm. A bunch of different startups. And so there is a lot of folks going from one company to the next. And there's an understanding about that among the folks who are hiring these individual contributors who just kind of get it, right? These are just folks who are trying to, it's more than just trying to find, do they like this role or this industry? It's just trying to learn as much as they can. Because I, for one, would be a lot more satisfied with myself if I could say, yeah, I learned what sales looks like and had an impact on it at Google. And then I got to do it again at Indeed. And then I got to do it again at, UShip or whatever it is, right? Versus just, I saw this one startup from startup to acquisition like you were just describing. So yeah, I think that's great advice.
And one thing too is, as a manager now, I really appreciate people who have actually spent time at a variety of different companies for that exact reason that you mentioned, which is I think those people are generally going to be more knowledgeable than someone who's stayed in one role at one company for a long time.
I got one more question I wanted to ask, just in terms of this career path thing that you mentioned sort of in the beginning. You said you did an internship right out of college. For folks who are wanting to go, say, from sales into marketing leadership, would you recommend, or do you think it's necessary to go back and get a graduate degree in marketing? Or would you say just learn from one of the entry-level or individual contributor roles within marketing, say a product marketing role, in order to get there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've talked a lot about this with a number of different people, especially in product marketing, because there's generally not a super straightforward career path to it. Mm-hmm. The most common way to get into it, like you mentioned, is an MBA. Mm-hmm. And that's a soft requirement for a lot of companies, but especially bigger companies. If you want to be in product marketing, you probably need your MBA. But I don't think it's the only way. I think one of the cool things about startups is if you prove yourself and if there's a need and if the stars align, you can put yourself in a position to do almost anything. And if you offer to help out, and I think actually salespeople, the best salespeople, could probably be great product marketers because they know how to tailor a pitch to the right person. They know their customers super well. They know the product super well. They have a really good background on a lot of that stuff. So if you are a salesperson at a company, at a smaller startup or even a bigger tech company or wherever, and you want to break into marketing, I think one of the best ways to do it is start to get involved. Like go ask to help out with a product launch to see how it works. Or when I'm going through a launch, I like to solicit feedback from sales, and I leverage the handful of salespeople that I trust a lot to help sharpen that messaging and get their feedback on the materials that we're putting together in the launch plan. And if a salesperson came to me and wanted to really help out and took the initiative, I certainly wouldn't say no. And if you do that enough and you're good at it, then and a role pops up, that's a great way to make that transition. But grad school is definitely, MBA is definitely a very, very common path as well.
Thanks so much. I love the way you laid this out. It was full of value, full of actionable things that people can really use, which is a goal of mine for this show. So now that I've successfully picked your brain and seen what I could get out of it, it's time, James, for you to tell us about what you are putting in it. So tell us about a learning resource or something that you've engaged with here recently that is, informing your approach that's just got you excited these days.
Oh man, that's a great question. I am all over the place. I read a lot, both on the book side, but also I think there's so many great people putting content out there. Some of the stuff I've been reading more recently is by Mick Pono. That's MYKPONO. He puts out a lot of great stuff around product marketing and marketing in general. His content, he doesn't publish a lot, but the stuff that he does publish is really great. But honestly, the majority of the stuff that I learn is actually just from talking to people. So I hate to sound like a broken record, but I think you can learn so much more just by talking to a few people than you could by reading 6 hours worth of articles. So I would say just try to keep in touch with people as much as possible and follow them on LinkedIn if they're publishing smart stuff, and try to develop that relationship because it goes a long way.
Sound advice, man. I do that on the show every day. I get to do it for a living. People are definitely a learning resource if you pay attention. And so I know that just like me, everybody listening has become fast fans of yours, and they're going to want to know how to keep up with you, James. So tell us how folks can connect with you.
Yeah, I'm not much of a Twitter user, so probably the best way is on LinkedIn. You can find me. It's just James Winter, like the season, on LinkedIn. And always happy to meet people. I love meeting people. It's my favorite part of working. So please feel free to send a request and shoot me a message. And if anyone's ever curious about making the jump from individual contributor to head of marketing or has any questions about that, what it's been like, I'm super happy to talk about it.
Love it. Thank you so much. I have a bunch more questions just because your background kind of mirrors a lot of the things that I personally would like to accomplish. So that means, James, that you're going to have to suffer through another one of these with me sometime. I'll have you back on. But for now, we'll close this out, and I'll just again say thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nikki. This was great. Love everything that you guys are doing, so keep it up.
If you're a regular listener of B2B Growth, odds are you might enjoy sales success stories with Scott Ingram as well. Well, this year, thanks to a partnership with Outreach and Sales Hacker, our friend Scott Ingram is making the live stream of his Sales Success Summit available for free. The event is on October 14th and 15th, featuring 13 presentations and 5 panels, all presented by top-performing B2B sales professionals. You can check it out and register at top1.fm/live. That's top1.fm/live.